Thank you for joining us for today's campus chat with our Chief Diversity Officer, Robbie Routenberg, who's also an alum from the class of 2005. My name is Amanda McCarthy, and I serve as the Assistant Director of Alumni Communications and Engagement. And before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone of a few housekeeping items. If your Zoom name does not show your full name, you just take a minute and enter it into the chat so we know you're here with us today. Please go ahead and mute your microphone. It looks like you've all done that already. If you're not speaking, just to help us minimize the background noise. If you have questions throughout the event, go ahead and enter them into the chat. And please note today's session is being recorded so that we can hopefully share it with those who couldn't join us. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Robbie Routenberg. As I mentioned before, Robbie is a graduate of Geneseo's class of 2005, and they hold a master's degree in higher education administration from the University of Michigan. Robbie started serving as Geneseo's interim chief diversity officer in 2017 and became our CDO in 2018. They lead the college's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts to advance the broader aim of creating an inclusive and supportive campus climate. And today, Robbie's going to share some updates with us on DEI efforts across campus, including our work toward becoming an anti-racist college. Robbie, thank you so much for being here with us today. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the welcome and the introduction. And thank you to everybody for being part of this conversation today. As mentioned, my name is Robbie Routenberg. I'm a proud alum of Geneseo and eager to highlight that part of who I am. It certainly shapes my approach and my, not just approach, but some of my successes and challenges in the role, and more successes because I'm an alum than the challenges. But I'm excited to have this conversation. I have a lot of things that I prepared that I could talk about. And the good news is that even if I shared everything that I prepared, I'm scratching the surface of what has been going on the campus. But I wanted to first actually ask you all to introduce yourselves and to say why you joined today. Because what I don't want to do, if we can avoid it, is me talk at you for an hour with my whole laundry list of fun things to say. I'd rather select the items that I think are most interesting to you all based on why you joined. And so if you, I don't know, if I can call on you based on who I see on the screen, that could be a good way to start. And if you don't know why you joined, you just thought it seemed interesting, that's a fabulous reason. And so no pressure to have any specific reason, but it's an invitation if there was something that you were particularly curious about to share that. So people are dancing around on my screen. Eddie, would you mind going first? Introduce yourself if you would, and if there's anything that drew you to register, that would be great to know.
Sure, glad to. I joined because I go where you go, Robbie. The whole concept of anti-racism and diversity is really one of my passions. For those of you that don't know, I'm also an alum, and I live actually in the village of Geneseo, and I was also recently elected a trustee in the village of Geneseo. So while it's not part of my job, I feel sort of a moral leadership obligation to see what I can do from that perch as well as other perches to see if we can move our whole community, not just the campus. And that's one of the things that I'm a broken record about. We often talk about the campus. I see us more as a community, and there are some differences and similarities between what we do in the community, which includes the college. And I want to learn as much as I can and have as much dialogue as I can to see if we can move in the direction that Robbie's talking about.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Dan, could I invite you next to introduce yourself, and if there's anything you want us to know about why you joined today, that'd be helpful.
Sure. Dan Dermosich, graduate of Geneseo in 1968. Was a teacher and administrator in the Rochester City School District for 42 years, the last 23 as principal of School Without Walls. I'm currently the coordinator for Rochester Coalition for Public Education. It's a collective organization of mainly educators who are trying to advocate for research-based progressive education policy and practices in the city school district. And I'm also a member of the City County Commission on Racial Equity. And we're making recommendations within the next few months to the city and county on how to reduce inequity and create more racial justice. So I'm interested in terms of what Geneseo is doing. I remember in '68, we had I think a student population of about 2,000, and I think we had maybe 3 or 4 people of color who were students at that time.
Thank you, Dan. Heather, could I invite you next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Maldonado, class of 95. I'm here for 2 purposes. One, to update my understanding of what Geneseo is doing in this space, because I would imagine it is different than when I was on campus in the early 90s. So it's personal information. And as I talk to my fellow alumni and people who might be interested in attending Geneseo, I want to have my facts straight. And then the other is I serve as the president of the Geneseo Alumni Association. So I want to make sure that I'm up to date in that space as well, because we recently completed our strategic planning, and equity, inclusion, and diversity issues made it to the strategic plan as well. They should, and I want to see how we can best align the Alumni Association's work with the work of the campus.
Great. Thank you. Courtney?
Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Owen. I'm a proud alumni of 2015 and 2017. I even worked at Geneseo in student life and residence life there for a while. So I'm always interested to see what my alma mater is doing, especially in regards to DEI. But also, I am currently the assistant director of housing and residential life just down the road at Finger Lakes Community College. And so I'm very passionate and interested to see what, SUNY, our fellow SUNY, is doing, and really interested to hear from you, Robbie, how you've been, tackling the challenges of COVID, and how really to connect with our students who are already maybe struggling and now in a world of COVID. So really interested to kind of hear what SUNY Geneseo has been doing.
Thank you. Anne?
Hi, I'm Ann Tillinghast, class of 1996, and currently on the Geneseo Foundation Board, as well as the Foundation Board representative on the SGAA. I was formerly working in athletics and recreation at Johns Hopkins University here in Baltimore, until I took a pause on my career to raise our young daughter. But I am here in Baltimore City, Maryland, and I will say that one of the upsides of the pandemic is that I get to attend all these things on Zoom now, because, having such a soft place in my heart for Geneseo, being out of state, it's always been hard to really still be deeply ingrained in what's going on, but I feel like Zoom has brought us all closer. So yeah, I just really enjoy hearing what's going on. And I know, Robbie, you are really on top of your game. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing everything you have to share today.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And Cynthia, it's so good to see you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Cynthia Avery, and I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs at the University of San Diego, proud class of 88, and I really enjoyed my time at Geneseo, and that's really what got me into working in student affairs. I was an undergraduate hall director there at Wayne Hall many years ago, and had many years in Geneseo as an RA, so orientation advisor, all those kinds of things. So it's great to be with you all today. Robbie knows that I'm also serving on the Sexual Assault Task Force. I'm sure that's the wrong name. But I have similar
advisory committee.
Thank you,
You're
Robbie.
good.
But I have a similar role at the University of San Diego, and there's clearly some overlap and intersection between Title IX and DEI work. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. I'm also on our anti-racism task force at the University of San Diego. So I'm looking for other great ideas, what other campuses are doing that we might be able to mold and shape for the University of San Diego. Glad to be here with all of you.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Michelle or Tracy, do you want to say anything? Michelle, unmuted first.
I'll say hello. Hi, I think I've met almost all of you, but I'm Michelle Warden, class of 92, also the interim director of alumni relations right now. And I just want to extend a thanks to Robbie for presenting today. And she's a wonderful colleague, and I'm looking forward to hearing updates, because even though I work at the school, I tend to miss some things along the way with emails and so on, so I'm working remotely like many of my colleagues.
Thanks for being here.
Hey folks, Tracy Gagne here, class of 93. I'm sorry about the get up. I didn't know I'd be on screen. I also work in alumni relations, proud alum, class of 1993. And I'm attending because obviously information is power. I work with 3 new evolving alumni affinity chapters, one being alumni of color, one being LGBTQ+, and one being Jewish. So I just feel like I need to be informed about what's happening on the campus when I work with these alumni volunteers in these groups, and obviously just in general. So good to see everybody.
Thanks, Tracy. And thanks for hopping on camera, even though you didn't.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that that's our group. And if others join, we will welcome them eagerly. But because we are a small group, it's helpful to me to know who's chatting, right? Who's in the Zoom room. And so thank you for indulging me with those introductions. It sounds like
Maria just joined.
Oh, wonderful.
I did. Hi, sorry for being a little late. I was
You're
on
fine.
call, went a little over, so I apologize.
No, you're fine. I'm expanding my Zoom room screen so that I can.
Okay. So I'm class of 97, I think. Yeah, 97. Seems like a time ago. I live near Philly now. I work as a federal public defender.
Very good. And Maria, is there any reason that you wanted to join this session in particular, or just caught your eye and of interest?
Well, I kind of always was interested in improving diversity at Geneseo. It was a big transition moment for me when I went to Geneseo. I felt like I was one of 10. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but it was a big transition. And I feel like when I've spoken to students or participated in programs, I feel like it's gotten a little better, but it's still an issue. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of hear what initiatives are being implemented.
Great. Thank you, Maria. Appreciate you sharing that. And thanks, Eddie, for letting me know that our room had expanded. And if anybody else joins, we'll welcome them as the conversation goes. So with that as the backdrop, I think I'll dive into some updates and give you a little bit of context about my role and the office that I work in and how it came to be, as well as some things that I'm excited to share that we've been working on. I encourage you at any point to interrupt me. I'll keep an eye on the chat. And so those are subtle and helpful interruptions. If you have any questions or things you want to toss in the chat, either to me or to everybody, that's great. And you can also literally unmute yourself and chime in at any point. I want to be able to provide lots and lots of information, but I think, the more that we can talk about these things, the better. I think it's going to be more engaging and lively that way. So I'm happy to facilitate a conversation just as I am to present. I will say two caveats, and then I want to do an acknowledgement before I jump in. 2 caveats. First one, I don't know everything about everything. And so you will probably ask me questions and I will say, I don't know. I often know how to find out, right? Or I know the person to ask, but there's no way any one of us knows everything. I just want to say that up front. If you ask questions, which I encourage you to do, I'm saying in advance, I may or may not be able to answer every question you toss my way. And then the other caveat I want to offer up front is one of whatever we cover in this hour are simply going to be highlights. They're not going to be an exhaustive list of everything that's happening. And that's for two reasons. One, because there's so much going on. And second of all, and it connects actually to that first caveat, that a lot of what's happening now, and I'm really energized by this, and I'll go into more detail about this in a little bit, is happening at the department or the student organizational level. And that's tremendous, because that's different than in the past. There's, and I look forward to saying a little more, so maybe I'll just sort of say that as a teaser, that a lot of what's happening on the campus, you know, that's happening college-wide or college community-wide, I'm thinking about what you offered, Eddie, you know, that I can share tons of stuff about that. But I don't always know everything about everything that's happening at the unit level or the student organizational level. And so I'm really just going to be talking, you know, about highlights and sort of painting the broad picture without being able to go into every little detail. So those are a couple caveats, right? The other thing I want to do in advance of me jumping in, and I'm going to put this in the chat, is I want to offer Land Acknowledgement. This is something that we have been doing a lot at the college, really in the last 6 months, maybe a year, less so before then, but still some before then. And this is an example, and I put it in the chat in case there's pieces of this that you want to use for your own work. So I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement, which is designed as an expression of sorrow and remembrance to those whose historic territory we reside on. In particular, Geneseo resides on the homeland of the Seneca Nation of Indians and Tonawanda Seneca Nation. Acknowledging that we're not all in Geneseo currently. If you haven't already, I encourage you to learn more about the original occupants of the land on which you reside. You can use, there's a native land app you can use. It also connects to websites such as sni.org, where you can learn more about the community of more than 7,000 enrolled Indigenous peoples. Oh, thank you, Cynthia. Feel free, if you know more about where you're located and the original occupants of that land, to put that in the chat too. So land acknowledgements are important because they're an expression of humility. They're an expression of acknowledgement of the history, right? Of whose land it is, and a nod to the history of how the college or how the organization or how whatever you're representing came to be on that land. And so I just offer it symbolically as a starting place. I want to toggle, if I could, to share a little bit about the role that I have and where it came from, and to give a little bit of context. In my introduction, Amanda offered that I started as the interim chief diversity officer in the summer of 17, so about 3 years ago, just 3 years and a smidge, right, and a bit. There actually was a SUNY-wide effort that led to the creation of my position, and I want to give acknowledgement to that too. So I think it might have been in 2015, SUNY produced a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, and it gave the campuses a little bit of time to put some things into practice. One of those was that in this SUNY policy, all campuses across the system, all 64, had to have a chief diversity officer in place by the summer of 17. It's the first system to do that. And I don't know if any other systems have done that since, right? But SUNY definitely was the first to say system-wide, every entity, every college or university is going to have somebody in this role. Now, some SUNY campuses did this in different ways. So some SUNY campuses said, we already have a chief diversity officer, so we've already met that requirement. There were a handful that was the case for. That was not the case at Geneseo. Some campuses had somebody who was doing similar enough work that they just slapped on the title, right? Some campuses didn't have the funds or didn't, organize the funds in such a way to create a position, but they shared a position with other campuses. I know of one person who at that time was hired to be the chief diversity officer at 3 SUNY institutions, right? There are different approaches that campuses took. I will say that what Geneseo did, it really, to me, and I take no credit for it because it was a decision made before I jumped on, to me is the best practice. they said this work is important enough that we're not just going to add the title to an existing person who's doing similar enough work, but we're actually going to create a position. Somebody who can, by the creation of this position, build more capacity to be able to implement and make change in the domains of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and recently adding the language of anti-racism. And so, to create a line, right, in any budget climate is hard, and that I'm sure was a challenge at that point, but is a big statement of priorities and turning values into action for the college. When the Chief Diversity Officer position was created at that time, also the Office of Diversity and Equity was created, and that's the office that I sit in. Within that office is our affirmative action processes, our Title IX processes, and a lot of the work that we do, and this is my role, to engage the whole campus in thinking, and broader community, in thinking about how do we move the needle around diversity, equity, and inclusion. When I think about my role, I often use sort of the phrase, my role is to inspire, to provide resources, and to hold accountable all members of our community to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into everything that we do. And so if I'm successful, and you heard this a little bit before in my caveats, if I'm successful, I'm not doing everything. If I'm successful, I might not even know everything about everything, right? Because it's really, if I'm successful, it means that there's work happening in all corners of our community that are helping move the needle. And so some of the things that I'm excited to share with you really point to that integration, that holistic integration across the campus. That word inspire that I said in my in how I conceptualize my role is really important. And inspiring people to not just be motivated to incorporate a set of values, but to also have the resources and to make movement, concrete movement, is part of what I'm most proud of. And you'll hear that threaded in some of the programming that I'll be able to highlight. So that's sort of the broad strokes about what this position is, where it came from, the office that it's situated in, and what the office is, broadly speaking, trying to accomplish. Before I got to campus, there was something called a strategic diversity plan. There's an entity on campus called the President's Commission on Diversity and Community. On many campuses, these entities have been popping up in the last 5 or 10 years. I'm really proud that ours has been around for over 20 years. And that group, before I got to campus, were the main people, the architects behind our strategic diversity plan. And so what I've decided to do in terms of some updates is to give you a couple highlights within each of the goal areas of that plan, because it provides a nice structure for thinking about the broadest range of things that we're doing. There are 4 goals in the plan. Looking back at my notes, the first goal, I'm going to read it off for a second, is recruit, support, and retain a diverse student body. And what I'll do also is I'll lift that into the chat. All right. The second goal, I'm just going to put them all in there for a minute, is similar, but it's about faculty, staff, and administration. So recruit, support, and retain a diverse faculty, staff, and administration. The third one has to do with our community. So to create and maintain an inclusive campus community in which all members flourish and feel valued. And the last one has to do with cultural competency and learning. So it says to make cultural competency and an awareness of global perspectives central components of engagement with diversity in Geneseo's curricular and co-curricular approaches to learning and development. That's a mouthful. And so those are our 4 goal areas. And as I said, I'm going to give you a couple highlights from each. And then I want to talk a little bit about anti-racism, and interrupt me at any time, because I can get excited and talk a lot, which is not the point. So in that first goal, recruit, support, and retain a diverse student body. I'll give a couple highlights here. Recently, we have been working with SUNY to move test optional. And so we've been able to move test optional for sort of the short term, and hopes that we'll be able to sustain that in the longer term. Test optional means, from an admissions perspective, that to be a successful candidate for admission here at the college, you do not need to produce test scores. We understand from research and understanding of the landscape of standardized testing that standardized testing disproportionately affects negatively people of color, people from low-income backgrounds, certain groups of marginalized prospective students who, based on resources, based on the kinds of questions that are asked on standardized tests, based on things like stereotype threat, based on a whole host of factors, underperform on those testings relative to not only white peers, but relative to their potential. And so standardized testing, the literature on this, the research around it, tells us that it's actually not an effective marker of a student's ability to be successful at a college. And so our efforts to move towards test optional are equity minded, and also allow for students who we believe can be successful here to have a fair and holistic review that's going to effectively judge their preparation for coming. We know that campuses that have moved to test optional see more diversity in their incoming classes. And so I am excited to see what happens for us, in a year from now, et cetera, as we move, at least for the short term in this direction, and hopefully in the longer term too. We also have been making a transition from moving some of our merit-based scholarships towards need-based scholarships where we can. When we can do that, it makes, again, a huge difference in terms of making available the funds that allow students who would be successful here, but whose income income and the cost of the tuition is prohibitive for them to join. It makes it more possible from an access perspective for them to enjoy being a student here at Geneseo. And so there's a few things happening, and I credit my colleagues in enrollment management and advancement for that legwork, but there's a few things happening on the admissions side that makes a huge difference as we think about diversifying our student body. We also, and I'll give one other highlight here, and there are people on this call who know more about this than me, and so if anyone wants to jump in, please do. I know that our career development area, in partnership with some of our alumni relations people, have been working to provide mentorship opportunities for all students, but particularly minoritized students. So pairing alums with current students, maybe BIPOC students with a BIPOC alum, or an alum who identifies as LGBTQ+ with a student who shares that identity, to provide mentorship and support, and thinking earlier about how do we bring our alums to, in meaningful ways to engage with current students. That helps the retention of our students. It helps the success of our students. It also is a nice way for alums who are looking to engage to be able to provide, meaningful service to the college and to the students, and also have fulfilling for them as well. Those are a couple examples with that first goal. The second goal, I'm giving you a couple highlights here, right, about recruit, support, and retain a diverse faculty, staff, and administration.
Robbie, is it permissible to throw in questions now, or do you want us to wait?
At any point. Do you want to ask a question now?
Yeah, I do. I'm wondering what type of on-campus support systems you have for impoverished, our students who are coming from impoverished backgrounds, kids of color who need the kind of support systems in order to be retained and to stay in school.
Yeah. So there's a few different thoughts that come to my mind in response to that question. It's an excellent question. We have an Office of Multicultural Programs and Services. There's a new leader of that area, Sasha Elwa Evans, if anybody has interacted with her or has an interest there. A lot of new things have been coming from that arena to support students socially, who are BIPOC students. Some of them are low-income students. Also within her portfolio is our LGBTQ programs and services area, our Hillel, so supporting Jewish students. There's a range of students who seek her or her office broadly for support. she's been doing a lot of interesting things that are socially based. And so a lot of that has been really in new ways to support our cultural clubs, new ways to think about, particularly somebody asked about COVID earlier. So new ways to, yeah, Courtney, that was you. New ways to identify socially some systems to support these students while most engagement is happening in a remote, virtual context. And so a lot of that is happening from her arena. Also, though, what I think is important is the integration throughout the campus. And so we have somebody called named Joe Cope, who is the, I'm going to get his title wrong, Associate Provost for Student Success, Student Academic Success, something close to that. And he is thinking about the academic, integrating an equity-minded or an anti-racist-minded approach into academics from a student support perspective. And so he and his area, which includes our academic dean and others, are thinking about academically, how do we find ways to support these students? I'm going to connect your question with the question about COVID and give another example. So in the spring, we were worried about students who might be studying remotely all of a sudden, but who don't have reliable internet, reliable computer, right? Some of these things that we understand to be the experience of disproportionately of low income students. We also know that some students, when they go into their home environment, they aren't alone. They're surrounded by immediate family or broader family within their living environment. And so he and others were thinking about academically, how do we prepare faculty to be more supportive and understanding of those situations for students? How do we think about the grading structure to allow pass-fail decisions actually to happen at the very end of the semester, which is different than ever before? So to allow students flexibility, and lots of other things. But what I'm happy about is that kind of thinking is happening not just in Dr. Stasha's area, but is also in other areas of the college and thinking about who our students are. So,
Hey, Robbie.
Yeah.
Just wanted to follow up on a related question. So the Geneseo website says that of the student enrollment, 20.4% are multicultural. And it may be a question you can't answer, but I always look at the data that the college presents oftentimes as a marketing thing, as to say, look how diverse we are. Look at our faculty and class size and all that stuff. So I just want to know what defines multicultural in terms of that particular statistic, because often I've seen ranges from anywhere below 10% to as high as that number. I know that we want to market ourselves as a place that is attractive educationally and otherwise, that they're not coming to, although they are, a relatively white Livingston County to get their education. But I wonder what that statistic means.
Yeah. I'll answer it to the best that I can, although I like you suggested, it's a question that's going to be answered in much more detail by my colleagues in enrollment. My understanding is that the multicultural, that language that's used on the website and other places references all BIPOC students. And so I don't like the language of non-white because it others people who don't identify as white, but that would be another way to articulate it. And so it is broad in its definition. And what I couldn't speak to in detail is where there's always gray with identity. There's lots of places where people would identify in multiple ways, and I don't know how that's parsed out. I don't know that level of detail with that coding. But broadly speaking, multicultural label, I believe, is used to refer to all BIPOC students.
Does it also include international, Robbie?
I believe, and here you hear the hesitation in my voice, I believe that it refers to any international students who are not white. So I think it's a race-based label. I can look into that more, and if I learn something different than what I just said, I can follow up, because
The reason I asked the question is I think clarity and understanding is important, especially, the school may use one particular marker, and an individual department may use a different marker, and other students may use a third marker. So I wondered if we, sometimes it's healthier when we're communicating straightforward and using the same language.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. I'm going to move to the next goal area, just because I want to make sure that I can at least provide breadth in all of these areas, but then I'm happy to engage further. And I see some more people joined us on the call, which is fantastic. And I see a couple familiar faces, which is enjoyable. Hi, Denise.
Sorry I was late. It's International Men's Day, and I've been leading webinars since 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my gosh. Of course you have. So just for clarity, I just tossed in the chat the goal. It's goal number 2 within our strategic diversity plan. The first goal, for those who weren't here, is recruit, support, and retain a diverse student body. We talked briefly about that. I'm going to speak briefly about this second goal area. A couple things to highlight under here is a couple years ago, we started offering equity-minded search practice sessions. These are 2-hour, highly interactive sessions that when it was first rolled out, we told the campus that by July 1st of 18, it was required for all search chairs to participate with a 2-year expiration. So they had to participate within the last 2 years, although when you just start offering something, that expiration date doesn't mean a whole lot. And that by July 1st of 19, it would be required for 50% of search committees. These sessions, based on the feedback, we understand that they are sessions that people actually have expressed using a lot of the content in the search process and being able to think in different ways about implicit bias and structural ways to affect minimizing the role of implicit bias within a search. But what's interesting to me is within that year where it was required for just search chairs and not yet anybody more, there was about 20 people who would have been required to attend. And in that time, we had almost 200 people attend. And so it's been really, that for me is an indicator of both who's in our community and people opting into those sorts of things, but also the usefulness that people find in these sessions. At this point, we have had more than 300 people participate, and we've started rolling out an equity-minded search practice 2.0 for people whose 1.0 credential has expired, since we've been offering it for a couple years now. And they have been sessions that people really sign up for, not just when they have to, but also when they just can and want to, because they're thinking broadly about equity-minded practice in different roles that they play. Another thing that we did back at that same time is we started adding into the evaluative criteria for hiring in different language to the point of expressed or demonstrated commitment to diversity and inclusion. And so regardless of what role we were hiring for, that in order to be qualified for that role, you had to demonstrate a commitment to diversity and inclusion. The language of that is sometimes different for each job, because if you're hiring for a faculty member, you might word it about inclusive pedagogy or thinking about supporting a diversity of learners. If you're hiring for the health center, it might be more about, how that affects, health practitionership. But that core of a demonstrated commitment is consistent in every single post. It affects the interview questions, it affects the way that candidates are evaluated, and it becomes a requirement for hiring. So those are a couple of things that happened really just in the last couple of years. I'll give you one example just to highlight something on a not recruitment side, but a support and retention side. I'm really excited about a program that we lovingly call ACCC. It stands for Advancing Cultural Competency Certificate Program, which is we launched it in a pilot form a couple years ago, 3 years ago, right in that same period where I had just started and we were piloting a bunch of stuff. And we piloted it with 20 people over an entire year. And as we move post-pilot, we have been able to engage 70 people in this program since then, just in these last couple of years. ACCC is a 20-hour immersive experience for employees so for faculty, staff, and administrators, to be able to explore issues of cultural humility, identity, institutional racism, power and privilege, allyhood. And by the end of the program, they're developing action plans for how they can meaningfully apply these kind of concepts to affect their, what we call their sphere of influence. And so they're learning about identity and power and isms, and they're identifying a concrete way that they're going to make change to make their department, their committee, their engagement with students more DEI oriented. And so I'm excited that we've had at this point over 70 people participate in that program, which also means we have over 70 action plans showing up all across the campus, which is really exciting. I'm going to move to the third, and I'm moving quickly because, again, I want to give you some breadth here. Create and maintain an inclusive campus community in which all members flourish and feel valued. One of the things, there are a couple of things that I want to highlight in this domain. In the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot more work with orientation and new student programs. When we think about what it means to create an inclusive campus community, part of that is about when students just get to campus, what are their first impressions? You can only make the first impression once, right? And we have worked really hard to make sure that new students both feel like the Geneseo campus is an inclusive and welcoming and affirming one for them, as well as feel like it is their responsibility to help create that kind of community. And so we've been doing some theater-based work at orientation. We've been doing, we instituted just a year ago, a mandatory event during Weekend of Welcome for all students that's focused on issues of inclusion. And all of these programs are dialogue-based. And so they're small group focused, they're interactive, and they're intended to really engage in a critical conversation with our new students at a few different touch points very early about how, we hope that Geneseo it is a welcoming and inclusive community for them, and they feel affirmed. And it's also on them to make sure that this is an inclusive community for their own benefit and the benefit of their peers. We have supported that programming across the campus in other ways too. There's a new position this year, a specialty staff position within Res Life that we call the RA DICE position. And I'll just write this out. And Cynthia, thanks for sending what you are in the chat. The RA DICE position connects to a program that I want to tell you a little bit about. DICE stands for Diversity and Inclusion Community Educators. The DICE program offers request-based workshops for the campus where anybody who requests one of these can engage in customized, tailored dialogue on a topic of DEI relevance. We get a lot of workshop requests for topics around cultural appropriation, around Halloween. We also often get requests for workshops around allyhood versus accomplice, equity versus equality, organizations wanting a workshop that helps them think about how to be anti-racist within their organization, these kind of things on a request basis. We created the RA DICE position as a specialty staff role within Residence Life so that these facilitated dialogues can happen even more so within the residential context. And so they've been doing a lot of programming as well as active and passive programming to really raise the awareness of these kind of topics within our residential communities. And that's brand new this year and something I'm excited about. The fourth goal area is about cultural competency. And I'll just give a couple highlights here. We are in the process of starting an Intergroup Dialogue program on campus. I don't know if any of you have heard about Intergroup Dialogue before. A couple nods. So if you know about it, then you can share my excitement. And if you don't know about it, Google it. In fact, I'm going to write Intergroup Dialogue. Give it a Google because I'm going to give you the 30-second version, and it's worth reading more about. In my roots, when I was beginning my career in this work, I actually worked at an intergroup dialogue program for 6 years. And so it's something that I'm personally passionate about, and I'm been trying to promote the beginnings of an intergroup dialogue program on campus. Intergroup dialogue, when you heard me talking about DICE a minute ago, DICE is a good example of a co-curricular intergroup dialogue-ish program. But intergroup dialogue in its formal sense is a course-based program that brings people together across identity differences to talk about those very differences. And so you have intergroup dialogues on race and ethnicity, you have intergroup dialogues on gender, you have intergroup dialogues on socioeconomic status, on different identities, where you're intentionally creating a group of people who have opted into that dialogue for a sustained dialogue, across a semester, who have different identities and life experience as it relates to that focused area. And there's a really specific pedagogy and methodology behind it. It involves student facilitators. And so there's trained student facilitators helping lead these conversations. And some of the outcomes are around empathy and perspective taking, and a willingness and ability to intervene in bias when they see it, and people being able to really create movement in their external communities in ways that are more enhanced than before, as well as a sense of self-confidence and self-efficacy for being okay with who they are. And so there's a whole lot wrapped up in this concept of intergroup dialogue. And if it piques your interest, I recommend a Google search, because we're starting an intergroup dialogue program here on campus. It builds on the success of programs like DICE and Safe Zone and other things that come before it. This upcoming spring, we're teaching a facilitator training class in hopes to establish a pipeline to have students helping facilitate intergroup dialogue courses in the fall. Other things to note in this area briefly, outside of intergroup dialogue, we are currently going through a process of identifying which courses on campus connect to anti-racism goals, and are producing a list for students where they can register or keep an eye out for courses that have been determined related to anti-racism. We already have a similar list about courses that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or identity-based courses. This helps students be able to chart their academic adventure in ways that help them also explore these important concepts and have an academic experience that relates to this. They also, let me look back at my notes. Also, there's a program happening with Intercession, where our provost area is incentivizing faculty to teach more courses that relate to anti-racism. So these listings capture what are we already doing, and we're also trying to always do more. And so I'll just say that in the spirit of just highlighting a couple things. I've mentioned the words anti-racism a lot, and I'm dropping a link in the chat. I'm dropping 2 links in the chat, actually. That way we have some time for discussion. Both of these links have to do with campus's engagement in anti-racism right now. There is a committee that's been focused on how do we provide campus-wide programming and opportunities for engagement that promote anti-racism across the campus. That first link that I put in is that committee's work, and so you can read more about what they've been up to and what's coming next. That second link, and I mentioned this earlier, and I'm going to end my comments by highlighting it again, is a growing list. And so if you look back at this every couple of weeks, you'll see that there's more added. It's a growing list of basically action plans, statements coupled with action plans from departments who, these have been opt-in. These are departments that have said, we're learning about anti-racism, we're looking inward at our discipline perhaps, and thinking about the ways that historical racism shows up in our department and our teaching. And we are expressing a statement about that and a set of actions that we are going to do as a result of this heightened awareness. And so these are not solicited statements. These are departments who have decided, based on the campus conversations and as well as the national landscape, that they have come forward and said, this is what we're doing. And so that makes, for me, that this curated list that much more powerful, because they really are sincere and genuine statements coming from a lot of times they're academic departments, but they're not exclusively so. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well as a way, sort of a window into some of what's happening on campus. Just this week, I had a conversation with one of our STEM departments about, campus climate study. Just this week, I'd had an opportunity to look at a draft of another department's plan. There's a lot of active engagement around what's happening at the unit level that's going to make the difference for our students. And so just highlight that as something I'm really excited about. All right, I have talked way more than I intended to. Nobody interrupted me, so it happened. But I think we do have a few minutes left. If you want to ask any other questions, I'd welcome it. Or share, other reflections or things that you would like to add.
Robbie, I wanted to talk about the impact of COVID on your work. Just make a comment. Because I think oftentimes, while I appreciate everything you guys are doing, the whole notion of having an administrative and a policy framework for anti-racism and diversity is good, but creating the culture is a much, much bigger challenge. And I think COVID is one of those challenges because the ability to do the work that you do is limited by the lack of interpersonal relationships and interaction. So doing a lot of this stuff virtually is very difficult. One example is I wanted to let people know that, and everybody knows this, is that the campus is one geographic entity, but after Thanksgiving and before spring semester, there will be no campus. Everybody's going to be, except for a few people on campus, international students who do remote learning living there. Everybody that will come back to Geneseo, and I'm told by Mike Taberski, the Vice President for Student Life, that he expects probably 2,500 students to still be living in the village of Geneseo and learning remotely. That creates a challenge because for those 2 or 3 months, they'll be exposed not to the campus, but to the Geneseo village community and town community. And that's a whole different environment. And that exposure, and I've talked to students who, when they shop on Main Street, when they go to Walmart, they don't feel very positive about that. So it creates a challenge for those of us who live here to be a little bit more sensitive. And we'll talk to shopkeepers and everybody else about this issue. We really haven't worked at this issue as hard as we should. I know you guys are doing something separate on campus, but that's where your work is really important for us to learn from. And that's why I continue to argue about the larger community as opposed to just simply the campus community. Because you can see that during this post-COVID period, these students are just going to be in the community. They have no reason to be on campus. So that's why I think we need to continue to work together on these things and find ways to build those bridges.
I completely agree. And Eddie, I wonder if you want to do a plug for Cultivating Community, because there might be some interest from this group in participating in those kind of dialogues. Cultivating Community is an example. It's not enough, but it's a great example of the ways that we would want our community and the campus to be talking about issues together. Can you give us?
Yeah, Robbie and Professor Harrigan have developed a series of sessions called Cultivating Community. They've done it, I don't know, several a year, almost monthly or bi-monthly, where the whole community is invited to attend to talk about a series of topics. Now, I've attended in person all but like 1 or 2. They're great dialogues. Sometimes they have special speakers. Even though they're great, I will say the same thing. It's disappointing because very few community members come to these things. And it's the same people who believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, who believe in anti-racism, that show up at these things. So the challenge is, again, creating a culture of people beyond or advocates to come to these things. And that's the challenge. I think it's a great opportunity. Everything that Robbie's talking about are great opportunities. The question is getting people in the room. And getting people in the room during COVID is a special challenge as well.
It's true. A couple quick thoughts, and I'm watching our time slip away. Just to tie a loose end with Cultivating Community with COVID, it has always been an event that was in person in a ballroom with people around the tables and able to have table level dialogue. With COVID, knowing that not everybody wants to engage that way, can engage that way, feels comfortable engaging in that way, we've had a hybrid approach. And so some people participate in person and some people participate in Zoom, and it's all happening at the same time. And so you have people who are in Zoom breakouts, while if you have a group that's meeting in person, they are their own breakout, and then everybody can come together for distillation and share outs and these kind of things. And so there's a lot of innovative programming happening that is because of COVID, has forced us to be more creative, and actually by needing to be more creative has created better accessibility to these kind of things, which is an unintended, positive outcome. With that said, I think, Eddie, what you're raising, and I'll just sort of offer this as a comment, speaks to the inspire part of how I define my role. And it's not just my role. I mean, I really think it's everybody's role, but it's for, I have my role. So that I think from that lens, but I'll say it again for everybody's benefit who wasn't here. When I think about my role, I think about it to inspire, to provide resources, and to hold accountable all members of our community to integrate DEI and recently anti-racism into everything that we do. And what you're talking about, Eddie, about culture speaks directly to the idea of inspiring. And how do we all inspire a sense of care and commitment, so that it can translate into engagement, action, growth, and change. So I'll offer that as a closing thought. I see Amanda came back. I think that means that's it.
I just wanted to thank you, Robbie, so much for spending time with us today and for sharing those updates. We really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for participating in the call. This is such important work. So glad you're interested in the updates and being involved. So thank you so much and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And don't hesitate to reach out if I can be helpful in any regard.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And stay safe.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everyone. Bye.
Bye, Denise.